I'm grateful for everyone's presence here, and I feel honored that so many of you decided to show up today to lend your hand and time in support of my first book. My name is Aryamaan Mohapatra, and I am an automotive engineer from VIT and a designer from IIT. But we are not here to talk about that today. We are here to talk about a story. So let's dive in. So, how did the idea begin? It's November, let me tell you this with a short story. It's November 2016, a mildly cold afternoon in Kolkata. The kind of cold that doesn't ask you to put on a jacket, but you feel it anyway. I'm sitting at the back of the classroom during lunch. In front of me, my classmates discussing and are deep in conversation. The future of AI, tangled up with pop culture references, back and forth just as teenage conversations tend to. In front of me, on the desk, were my two most prized possessions for my everyday school bag, my notebook and my sketchbook. I don't know exactly which sentence in the conversation did it, but something did. What followed was a whirlwind, ideas and half-formed concepts suddenly crowding into my mind, faster than I could catch them. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in class, technically present, but really somewhere else entirely, turning the idea over and over, watching it take shape. At the moment a free period began, I didn't waste it. I opened my notebook and instead of formulas, I wrote down the first chapter of my book. Now, this wasn't out of nowhere. I had been writing for years by then. Short stories, story concepts, sketches of original characters, the occasional fan fiction tucked into the back pages of a notebook. My real first brush with this was the first time when someone outside my own head told me that my story was worth reading. It was back in 2009 with the Scholastic Young Writers Competition. So by 2016, I wasn't new to this habit. It was an old one, finally finding its proper subject. Coming back to that November, I spent the better half of the post-lunch classes for the next month doing the same thing over and over again. One page, then another, then another. Teachers talked in the front about the extra classes, staybacks, writing formulas, understanding concepts. But for me, I was somewhere else, building a world one page at a time. About a month and a few days later, the short story was complete. And then a few classmates who had been snooping around saw what I was finally doing and couldn't resist anymore. They came over, saw the book and snatched it up and read the story right out of my hands. The whole thing, right then and there. When they finished, they didn't hand it back to me. They asked for more. A small spark was lit. The log started to get warm. The fuel was ready to be dumped. And then came the exams. Priorities shifted the way they always do at that stage. Suddenly, it was about ranks, percentages, getting into good colleges. The notebook didn't go anywhere dramatic. It simply moved to the corner of the room and started gathering dust. That, by the way, is not the story of this particular book. Over the years, plenty of ideas came and went. They knocked on the door of my head, and each one would trigger the purchase of a brand new notebook and enthusiastically get filled for a few pages, only to join that one shelf in the corner of the room, patiently waiting to complete, not abandoned, just paused. 2021 Bhubaneswar. It was during my move to Bhubaneswar in 2021 that all these notebooks, years of them, came crashing down. quite literally in some cases. Going through them was strange. Years of concepts, half written and forgotten, left in mid sentences, stories that never found their final form. Some because they leaned too far into explicit content, some because they were built on ideologies that were too extreme to stand on their own. But some were too childish as well to survive the years between. But that one story remained. It looked on the surface seemingly complete, and yet underneath that, it was unmistakably, undiscernibly incomplete. Unfinished in a way that wasn't a flaw, it was an invitation. It was, in its own quiet way, begging for a revival. And what better time for that revival than the lockdown that followed? A forced stillness that for once gave the embers exactly what they had been waiting for, a chance to be reignited. So, where did we get all the inspiration from? Here's the thing about inspiration. You really don't choose it. You unconsciously gather it and keep ideas from everywhere. Books, films, cartoons, games, magazines, even advertisements. The choices your brain makes when you hold on to them and what to do never really in your hands. But slowly, quietly, those borrowed fragments transform into something else. The concepts are simply ready to burst, and this story was one of them. Back in 2016, this was just a short story. No sequel in mind, no expansion plan. But over the years, the story and I did the same thing. We evolved, we aged, we matured, and we both kept gathering. A decade's worth of information jammed into one brain through every medium it could find. It started with cartoons and anime. My mother was an avid watcher, and she kept tuning the channels, watching them with me side by side. I still remember Transformers, Ben 10, Spy Kids, Thundercats, He-Man, to name a few, on repeat day after day. The exact routine was as follows. I would rush off from the school bus in Hyderabad, run down a narrow alley as fast as I can, and reach the apartment entrance. My mother would be standing on her scooty, waiting to pick me up. We would zip past the entire alleyways of the complex and find our parking spot, dash up the stairs, and land in front of the television exactly before 3 p.m. to catch the latest episode. There were no Netflix that time, not even YouTube. If you missed an episode, that was it. You waited until summer break or until the season ended for the chance at reruns. Then came the books. They took over and they kept me up later than I should have admitted to anyone at that time. I wasn't supposed to read the Da Vinci Code that early. I picked it up in 2012, a mere 13-year-old child really discovering for the first time what a mature book actually sounds like. I kept reading, underlining words I did not know, going to my father to ask what these phrases meant, what these words sounded like. I finished the book in 7 days, and I remember wanting more the moment I closed it. Then came Tolkien, then Rick Riordan, the author of 39 Clues. Then came Tom Clancy's Red October, and finally George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. And scattered in between everything else, from Roald Dahl, Chetan Bhagat, and Ruskin Bond one month, to H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Arthur Conan Doyle the next. Slowly, Indian comics found their way too. Amar Chitra Katha became somewhat of a palate cleanser, a place to breathe wherever bigger, denser stories started to feel overwhelming. And then came the era of movies. I won't pretend piracy was the right way to do it. But for a middle or a high schooler at a non-existent budget, it was the only way. pen drives, hard drives, all loaded up so we could keep pace with the lunch table conversations. Somewhere in there, I found a particular pull towards sci fi and fantasy. And up until 2018, it was mostly superhero films and fantasy epics until I was introduced to various different critical directors such as Tarantino, Nolan, and Martin Scorsese. And finally came gaming. I had grown up a console kid, playing racing games and fighting games in my usual PSP and television. It wasn't until college where I was properly introduced to PC gaming through my cousins and my friends. And after that, genuinely, it opened a Pandora's box for me. And there were entire genres I didn't even know existed. I kept expanding my catalog, kept widening the range until 2022. Elden Ring happened. By that point, my story was about 40% done, and honestly, it was starting to feel limited, boxed in by its own four walls. And then I played Elden Ring and started learning about the story underneath it, the richness of the world building, the deliberate misdirection, the details hidden just out of reach, so that you wouldn't find it until you actually went looking for them. It felt like a breath of fresh air blowing straight into the story that had long since gone stagnant. Everything changed. I spent hours back and forth debating parts of the lore with my cousins and friends. Learned about Miyazaki, the director of the games, and his fondness for extracting pain from the players as they navigated his world. His creations, the Soul series and the Elden Ring together, were subtle digs at society, order and chaos, and the ways of the world. I started preparing for design school around the same time, and somewhere in that overlap, I began building worlds in earnest. I hit pause for the story itself, not because I had lost it, but because I needed to figure out something. I needed to figure out how a story of this size could fit inside something even bigger. I designed characters, concepts for places, or for objects. I was, without quite realizing it, building it a path for this story to walk entire multiverse of ideas. In 2023, I got into IIT Jodhpur for my master's in design. Part of me hoped to bring this story along, a showcase as a part of my work there. But something else arrived that shifted the entire momentum. I had found what I can only describe as the mother story. This one story could branch out from and connect all the different stories that I had in my mind. I got so excited, I stayed up 4 straight days just building the world and finally shaping a small excerpt from it. People saw the exhibition, they enjoyed it, and they said one thing: we want to know more. That's when I recognized the feeling, the exact same one in the classroom back in 2016. It was back. The computer switched on again, and the story finally walked out of from the pages of a notebook and onto the Word file. And that's how the survival of Cycle of Ash truly began. The story carries inspiration from everything that came before it. Every show, every book, every late night with a pirated movie, conversations with family, friends, cousins, everyone. Much like how a teacher passes down a technique and the student takes that same technique and quietly, unmistakably makes it theirs, this story did the same. So, why release this now? The story found its footing in the summer of last year when one fine day, Dr. Pragya Paramithopattanayak, the founder of Vrishti Media and Publishing House, and also very dearly my aunt, showed up to meet us. Her announcement of opening a media and publishing house was the final piece of puzzle that had been missing. Everything before that moment had been words, characters, and concept. What I needed now was a way out to the world, and that's exactly what had arrived. I spent the next 3 months with her, September through November of 2025, compiling and completing the book. There were nights I get so deep that I wouldn't notice time passing until about 3 a.m., where my eyes would finally quietly give in for me. Now, to the question of timing. I genuinely believe that this is the best possible moment for the story to exist in this world. It follows extraterrestrials, artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, and a world whose values are shifting under its own feet. All of which, if you have been paying any attention, is sitting right at the center of our own world. We are living through a moment where the world feels engulfed in doom scrolling, in emotionless online grazing, scrolling without really seeing what content looks like. And in the middle of that, I hope my story, with its own take on where these ideas might lead, can stir up a different kind of conversation. Here's something I want to be honest about though. Even though this book features artificial intelligence and advanced technology at the center of it, the book itself was not created by it. What you're holding is purely an output of 10 years. 10 years of growth as a writer and as a person, 10 years of commitment to telling stories that feel real even while they feel surreal and intriguing, 10 years of struggle from 40 pages transforming into 400, from pencil sketches to in the margins of the notebook to finished digital artwork. It is, from start to finish, a complete journey. And if you read it closely, you'll actually see that journey through the pages. The book reflects my own evolution as I was writing it. The early pages left deliberately a little raw, a little untuned, because that is where, honestly, the story began, by a much younger version of me. As the pages move forward, so does the writing. The sentences tighten, the voice steadies, the book slowly refines itself throughout the chapter by chapter, the same way I did while writing it. And by the end, my hope, my real hope, is that it leaves you wanting for more. Thank you very much. Jai Jagannath.